Zethkar stood in the corner of the briefing room and watched the humans with growing doubt about this alliance. His forearms crossed over his armored chest as he studied these soft pink creatures who claimed to be warriors. The Velthari Empire had ruled 3 star systems for over 2,000 years, and their military might was known across the galaxy, but now they needed help from these newcomers called humans. The thought made his mandibles click with irritation. The room smelled wrong to his sensitive nose. Human sweat mixed with their strange chemical deodorants and the metallic taste of their recycled air systems. Everything about them seemed weak and unnatural compared to his people's hardy biology. His thick gray skin could stop most projectiles, while theirs looked like it would tear if touched too roughly. Where the Velthari had natural armor plating and redundant organs, these humans had thin clothing and fragile bones. Jake Morrison, the human squad leader, walked over with what humans called a smile stretched across his face. His hair showed gray, streaks that indicated age, but his movements seemed steady enough. He extended one of his 2 arms in what Zethkar had learned was a greeting gesture among their kind. "Good to have you aboard, warrior," Jake said in heavily accented Velthari. "Looking forward to working together on this mission." Zethkar returned the gesture with one of his lower arms while keeping his primary hands free for combat readiness. "The Velthari fight with honor," he replied in basic human speech. "We will do our duty to the Alliance. That's all anyone can ask," Jake nodded, then called to his squad. Morrison's marauders fall in for introductions. 6 humans approached, and Zethkar noted how small they seemed compared to his 8-foot frame, Lisa. Chang appeared to be their explosives expert based on the devices attached to her equipment harness. Her dark hair was pulled back in what humans called a ponytail, and her brown eyes held a sharpness that reminded him of young Velthari hunters. Amy Foster carried what looked like primitive kinetic weapons instead of proper energy rifles. Her pale skin showed several scars that suggested previous combat experience. Ben Cooper moved with the careful balance of a trained fighter, but his weapon looked ancient compared to Velthari plasma rifles. Kate Mills seemed barely old enough for military service by human standards, though she handled her equipment with practiced ease. The other 2 squad members introduced themselves as Danny Price and Chris Webb, and both carried heavy weapons that fired metal projectiles instead of energy beams. "We know this is new for everyone," Jake continued. "The Velthari have tactics we can learn from, and hopefully we have some tricks that might help too." Lisa Chang stepped forward and pulled out a small gray cube. "Want to see how human explosives work?" she asked with enthusiasm that seemed inappropriate for discussing weapons of war. "This little beauty can take out a whole building foundation or create a nice tactical crater depending on placement." Zethkar examined the device with 3 of his eyes while keeping the 4th watching for threats as his training demanded. The explosive seemed crude compared to Velthari plasma charges that could be precisely controlled for different effects. "Interesting," he said politely, though he doubted such primitive weapons would prove useful against the Devourers. Amy Foster was cleaning her rifle with movements that seemed almost ritualistic. She hummed something she called an old country song while running a cloth along the weapon barrel. The sound was strange to Velthari ears, but oddly soothing. "Been using this rifle for 6 years," she said, noticing his attention. "Saved my life more times than I can count. Energy weapons are more reliable," Zethkar observed. "Kinetic projectiles can be stopped by armor or deflected by environmental factors." "True enough," Amy agreed. "But bullets don't need power cells. And they work even when electronics get fried by electromagnetic pulses." Captain Ryan Hayes entered the briefing room, carrying data tablets and looking tired. His uniform showed the insignia of someone with authority, but he moved with the casual manner that would seem disrespectful in Velthari culture. "All right, people, listen up," he announced. "We have confirmed intelligence about the Devourer infection on Kepler 442b. The holographic display activated, showing a mining colony that had gone silent 3 weeks ago. The buildings were covered in organic growth that pulsed with sickly green light. The Devourers have been breeding something new," Hayes continued. "Our job is to get in there, find out what they're planning, and stop it before they can spread." To other worlds, Zethkar studied the tactical situation with growing confidence. This would be a straightforward assault mission where Velthari superiority in combat would be clearly demonstrated. The humans would likely need protection during the fighting, but that was acceptable given their alliance obligations. Drop ships launch in 6 hours, Hayes announced. Get your gear checked and your heads in the game. As the briefing ended, Zethkar watched the humans joke and laugh among themselves as if they were preparing for a training exercise rather than deadly combat. Their casual attitude toward warfare seemed unprofessional, but perhaps fear made them behave strangely. He had heard that humans had short lifespans, which might explain their apparent lack of proper military discipline. Lisa Chang was showing Ben Cooper pictures of something she called her cat while Danny Price and Chris Webb argued about human sports scores. Kate Mills was writing what appeared to be a personal message while Amy Foster continued humming her strange songs. Only Jake Morrison seemed focused on the mission as he reviewed tactical data on his personal device. The transport ship rumbled slightly as they entered the target system, and Zethkar felt his body preparing for combat as generations of warrior instincts awakened. Soon he would show these humans how real warriors fought, and perhaps they would learn something about honor in battle. The Devourers were dangerous enemies, but with proper Velthari leadership this mission would succeed. He checked his plasma rifle in combat armor while listening to the humans discuss their plans in voices that seemed far too calm for soldiers. Approaching battle. Whatever happened on the surface, Zethkar was ready to protect his new allies and complete the mission with the honor that his people demanded. The dropships hit atmosphere like falling meteors, and Zethkar gripped his restraints with all 4 hands as the vessel shook violently. Through the small window he could see the infected colony growing larger below them and the organic growths covering the buildings looked even worse than the briefing images had shown. Thick tendrils of corrupted flesh wrapped around communication towers, while pulsing sacks of unknown purpose dotted the landing pads. 30 seconds to touchdown, the pilot announced over the comm system. Hope everybody had a light breakfast. Jake Morrison checked his weapon one final time and looked at his squad with calm eyes. Remember the plan, people, he said in a voice that carried no fear or doubt. We secure the landing zone, then push toward the main facility. Stay sharp and watch each other's backs. Amy Foster stopped humming her country song and chambered a round in her kinetic rifle. Lisa Chang ran final checks on her explosive devices while Ben Cooper adjusted his combat knife in its sheath. Kate Mills was reviewing building schematics on her datapad while Danny Price and Chris Webb prepared their heavy weapons for immediate deployment. The dropship touched down with a grinding crash that would have injured lesser species, but Zethkar absorbed the impact through his natural shock absorption systems. The rear door opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and immediately the sound of combat filled the air. Plasma fire and the wet screams of devourer bioforms echoed across the landing zone. "Move, move, move!" Jake shouted as he led his squad. Out of the transport, the first wave of enemies came from the main terminal building, and Zethkar felt his warrior instincts take control. 3 Devourer scout forms bounded toward them on too many legs while their acid drool sizzled on the metal deck plates. He raised his plasma rifle and fired precise shots that should have dropped them instantly, but Jake Morrison was already moving, and his first burst of kinetic rounds struck the lead creature center mass. The impact staggered the bioform, and before it could recover, Amy Foster put 3 shots into its head area. The thing collapsed in a spray of yellow ichor while Lisa Chang rolled a small explosive device toward the remaining 2 attackers. The explosion was perfectly timed and positioned to drive the creatures into overlapping fields of fire from Ben Cooper and Kate Mills. Both humans fired with mechanical precision, placing shots exactly where they would cause maximum damage. Within seconds, all 3 bioforms were dead, and the squad was already advancing toward the next position. Zethkar stared at the bodies for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. The humans had killed 3 Devourer scouts in less than 30 seconds using primitive weapons and basic tactics. More disturbing was how they had coordinated without any telepathic link or advanced communication systems. They seemed to anticipate each other's movements through subtle hand signals and shared glances. "Contact left," Danny Price called out as more bioforms emerged from a maintenance tunnel. This time, Zethkar was ready and he fired his plasma rifle. At the same moment, the humans opened up with their kinetic weapons. His energy beam punched through the lead creature's torso, while the human bullets tore apart its companions. The coordination was perfect, even though they had never trained together before. "Nice shooting, warrior," Jake said with what seemed like genuine approval. "Your weapon packs more punch than our rifles." Lisa Chang was already moving toward the terminal, building with an explosive device in her hands. "I can take out their tunnel access," she called back. "Give me 30 seconds. The explosion brought down half the terminal wall and sealed off the maintenance system that the Devourers had been using for rapid movement. Debris rained down around them, but the humans barely flinched as chunks of concrete bounced off their light armor. Amy Foster was humming again while she reloaded her rifle as if this was routine patrol duty. More bioforms poured out of the main facility, and Zethkar saw his first Devourer warrior-class enemy. The thing stood 12 feet tall with armor plating that could stop most energy weapons and claws that could cut through battle tank hulls. Its mouth opened to reveal 3 rows of serrated teeth while acid dripped from its extended tongue. "Big ugly coming through," Ben Cooper announced with no trace of fear in his voice. The warrior form charged toward them with surprising speed, and Zethkar aimed for its head where the armor was thinnest. His plasma bolt struck true, but only burned a shallow crater in the creature's natural plating. The thing kept coming and would reach their position in seconds, but Kate Mills was already moving to flank the creature while Danny Price and Chris Webb concentrated fire on its legs to slow its advance. Jake Morrison pulled out what he called a grenade and threw it with perfect timing so that it exploded just as the warrior form stepped over it. The blast didn't kill the creature, but it stumbled and gave Amy Foster a clear shot at its throat. Her kinetic round punched through the softer tissue, and the warrior form went down hard. Lisa Chang immediately moved forward with another explosive device to make sure it stayed dead. The entire engagement lasted less than 2 minutes, and the humans were already advancing toward the next objective. "How did you know where to aim?" Zethkar asked Amy Foster as they moved through the debris field. "Experience," she replied while scanning for new threats. "Fought these things before on Arcturus Station. They always have weak spots you just need to find them quick." Ben Cooper was checking the bodies for intelligence while Kate Mills updated their tactical map with new information about Devourer positions. Their efficiency was disturbing to watch because it meant the humans had developed specific tactics for fighting an enemy that the Velthari considered nearly invincible. The CUM system crackled with reports from other landing zones, and Zethkar heard human squad leaders calling in successful breaches of Devourer defenses across the colony. These soft pink creatures were not just surviving the assault, they were winning it with methods that seemed impossible given their physical limitations. "Main facility in sight," Jake announced as they crested a low hill. "Looks like they've been busy." The central building was completely covered in organic growth that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Devourer breeding sacs hung from every surface while feeder tubes connected different sections of the structure. The sight would have made most Velthari warriors pause to consider tactics, but the humans just checked their weapons and kept moving forward. "Lisa, what do you think?" Jake asked. "Can we bring it down?" "Give me 10 minutes inside and I can collapse the whole thing," she replied with disturbing enthusiasm. "Just need to find the right load-bearing points." Amy Foster was humming again while she cleaned her rifle scope, and Ben Cooper was sharpening his combat knife on a small stone. These humans treated the upcoming assault on a heavily defended Devourer facility like it was another day at the office. Their casual attitude toward extreme danger was beginning to worry Zethkar more than the enemy bioforms. "Ready when you are, boss," Danny Price said as he checked his heavy weapon ammunition count. Jake Morrison looked at his squad, then at Zethkar with those calm human eyes. "Time to earn our pay," he said. "Let's go kill some bugs." 3 days into the operation, everything changed, and Zethkar wished he could return to his simple assumptions about human weakness. The Devourers had evolved something new during their time on the colony, and traditional military tactics became useless overnight. The enemy could now perfectly mimic human and Velthari communication patterns, making every radio transmission suspect. Jake Morrison discovered the problem when he received orders from Captain Hayes to fall back to the landing zone. Something about the message felt wrong to the experienced squad leader, even though the voice patterns matched perfectly. When he tried to confirm the orders through alternate channels, he got contradictory information that made no sense. Squad leaders report to command post immediately, came another transmission in Hayes' voice. We need tactical reassessment, but Amy Foster had just seen Hayes leading a patrol in the opposite direction, and Ben Cooper confirmed visual contact with the captain near the water treatment facility. Lisa Chang checked her communication equipment for malfunctions, while Kate Mills reviewed the message timestamps looking for inconsistencies. Something is very wrong here, Jake announced to his mixed human and Velthari team. Either we have multiple Captain Hayes running around, or the bugs learned a new trick. Zethkar felt his combat instincts shift into higher alert status as he processed this information. His people had never encountered an enemy that could duplicate their telepathic communication signatures, and the thought of Devourers with that ability was deeply disturbing. How do we proceed if we cannot trust our own command structure? He asked. We adapt, Jake replied with grim determination. From now on, all orders get verified through personal knowledge checks. Questions only the real person would know the answers. 2. The new protocol worked for exactly 6 hours before the Devourers demonstrated how thoroughly they had studied their prey. When Danny Price received what appeared to be a distress call from Chris Webb, the voice not only sounded right but included personal details about Webb's family and childhood that only a close friend would know. Price rushed to the coordinates given in the message and found Chris Webb apparently trapped under debris from a collapsed wall. But when he got close enough to help, something felt wrong about the way Webb was positioned. The angle of the supposed injury didn't match the debris pattern, and Webb's eyes looked different somehow. Danny, thank God you found me, the Webb thing said in perfect voice patterns. My leg is pinned, and I think something is broken. Price approached carefully while keeping his weapon ready. What was the name of your first dog? He asked quietly. What kind of question is that? The Webb thing replied with apparent confusion. Help me get this stuff off my leg. Wrong answer, Price said, and put 3 rounds. Center mass before the creature could react. The thing that looked like Chris Webb writhed on the ground for several seconds before its features began to shift and flow into something definitely not human. Acidic blood pooled around the body, while extra limbs sprouted from what had appeared to be normal human torso. The real Chris Webb was found 2 hours later in a devourer feeding cocoon, barely alive, but recoverable. Jake Morrison called for a squad meeting in an area that Lisa Chang had swept for surveillance devices. The bugs are learning faster than we expected, he announced. Standard verification isn't enough anymore, Amy. Foster was cleaning her rifle with movements that seemed more aggressive than usual. So what do we do when they figure out personal information? She asked. Sooner or later they'll know everything about us. Then we get creative, Jake replied in a voice that made Zethkar's skin crawl. We use methods they can't predict or duplicate. Lisa Chang opened her equipment pack and pulled out devices that Zethkar didn't recognize. Pain response testing, she explained with clinical detachment. Bioforms react differently to specific stimuli. Even when they're mimicking us perfectly. Ben Cooper nodded and drew his combat knife. Quick nerve strikes in non-vital areas, he added. Real humans have specific reflexes that bugs can't fake, Kate. Mills was already working on what she called a field interrogation protocol. We combine physical testing with psychological pressure, she said. Create stress responses that require genuine human neural patterns. Zethkar watched in growing horror as these supposedly civilized beings planned systematic torture of anyone they suspected of being a devourer mimic. This violates every principle of honorable combat, he protested. You cannot torture prisoners or test allies through pain. We're not torturing prisoners, Jake replied calmly. We're identifying enemies who are trying to kill us and our friends. Sometimes there's a difference. The new protocols went into effect immediately, and Zethkar learned things about humans that would haunt his dreams for years afterward. When they encountered a group of colonists begging for rescue, Amy Foster didn't hesitate to test each one with carefully applied pain stimuli. Her movements were gentle and apologetic, but absolutely thorough as she checked for non-human responses. Lisa. Chang's explosives became tools for area denial and forced revelation rather than simple destruction. She would set controlled charges in buildings where they suspected infiltration, not to kill devourers, but to wound them enough that their true nature would show through pain-induced biological changes. Ben Cooper developed techniques for pressure point manipulation that could force a mimic to reveal itself without causing permanent damage to real humans. His knowledge of anatomy was disturbing in its precision, and he could identify devourer infiltrators within seconds of physical contact. Kate Mills created psychological profiles for testing suspects under stress conditions. She knew exactly which questions would break human composure in recognizable ways and which topics would confuse alien minds, trying to mimic human responses. Her interrogation sessions were quietly terrifying to observe. Contact ahead, Danny Price called from his overwatch position. Group of 6 civilians requesting extraction. Jake Morrison signaled for standard testing procedures, and the squad moved into position around the supposed survivors. We need to verify identities before transport, he announced to the group. Standard security protocols for your own protection. What followed was the systematic application of human verification methods that Zethkar could barely watch. Each supposed colonist was subjected to controlled pain stimuli disguised as medical examinations. Those who passed were questioned under psychological pressure designed to identify non-human thought patterns. The entire process took 30 minutes and revealed 2 devourer mimics among the genuine survivors. The real humans thanked Jake's squad for their thoroughness, while the exposed devourers were eliminated with clinical efficiency. Amy Foster comforted the traumatized survivors, while Ben Cooper disposed of the mimic bodies as if nothing unusual had happened. How can you switch between kindness and cruelty so easily? Zethkar asked Jake during a brief rest period. Jake looked at him with those calm human eyes and smiled without humor. Because the alternative is letting the bugs win, he replied. When you're fighting something that can look like your best friend, you don't have the luxury of being nice. About verification, Captain Hayes appeared on the comm system with new orders. That sounded completely authentic, but Jake immediately began verification protocols. The testing revealed that this was indeed the real Hayes, but the process involved methods that would have been considered torture under Velthari military law. Sorry about that, Captain, Jake said after confirming the identity. But we can't be too careful with the new situation. Understood, Morrison. Hayes replied with apparent approval. Better safe than sorry when the enemy can wear friendly faces. Zethkar realized that the humans were systematically abandoning their own moral principles in order to survive against an enemy that fought without honor. They were becoming something darker and more ruthless with each passing hour, and they seemed completely comfortable with the transformation. The central breeding facility loomed before them like a nightmare made flesh, and Zethkar wondered if his people's concept of honorable warfare had any meaning in a place like this. Organic tubes pulsed with unknown fluids, while the walls themselves seemed to breathe with malevolent life. The devourers had been busy during their occupation, and what they had created here defied every principle of natural order. Jake Morrison studied the facility through enhanced optics while his squad prepared for the final assault. Intel was wrong, he announced grimly. This isn't just a breeding center anymore, Lisa. Chang was setting up her demolition charges with mechanical precision, but her usual enthusiasm for explosives had been replaced by cold professionalism. What are we looking at, boss? She asked without taking her eyes off her work. Processing center, Jake replied. They're not just breeding new bioforms in there. They're converting captured humans into something else. Amy Foster stopped humming her country songs for the first time since Zethkar had met her. The silence from the usually cheerful soldier was more disturbing than any curse or complaint would have been. Ben Cooper was sharpening his combat knife with slow, deliberate strokes that suggested he expected close quarters fighting ahead. Kate Mills had gone pale after reviewing the facility scans on her datapad. "Sir, we're detecting human biosignatures, mixed with devoured genetic material," she reported in a voice that barely remained steady. "They're creating hybrids." "Define hybrid," Jake said, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "Human consciousness patterns trapped in devour bioform bodies," Kate continued. "Or devour intelligence networks controlling human physical structures." "Maybe both," Danny Price cursed quietly while Chris Webb checked his heavy weapon ammunition for the third time in 10 minutes. These hardened soldiers were showing signs of stress that Zethkar had not seen during the previous combat operations. Whatever waited inside the facility was worse than anything they had faced before. "Order, sir," Amy Foster asked, and her voice held none of its usual warmth. Jake Morrison was quiet for a long moment as he studied the pulsing walls and organic growths covering the target building. "We go in and we clean it out," he finally said. "No survivors, no samples, no evidence left behind." "What about human captives?" Ben Cooper asked. "If there are people still alive in there, then we evaluate on a case-by-case basis," Jake replied in a tone that suggested most evaluations would end badly. "But remember that anything that comes out of that place might not be human anymore, even if it looks familiar." Lisa Chang finished setting her external charges and turned to face the squad. "Building comes down in 30 minutes, whether we're inside or not," she announced. "Timer is set and can't be stopped remotely." Zethkar felt his warrior training rebel against the implications of that statement. "You would destroy the facility with your own people inside?" he asked. "That violates every rule of military honor." "Military honor is a luxury we can't afford right now," Jake replied without emotion. "If we get compromised in there, the last thing anyone needs is hybrid creatures escaping to spread this infection to other worlds." The assault began with coordinated breaches at 3 separate entry points, and immediately Zethkar knew they had entered something beyond his understanding of warfare. The interior walls were lined with cocoons containing shapes that might once have been human, while feeding tubes carried fluids between different sections of the facility. "Movement ahead," Danny Price called from point position. Multiple contacts approaching what emerged from the facility depths made Zethkar question everything he thought he knew about the nature of existence. They looked human at first glance, but their movements were wrong in ways that hurt to observe. One creature had the face of a young woman, but walked on joints that bent in impossible directions. Another maintained human speech patterns, while acidic drool dissolved its own lips. "Please help us," the woman thing said in a voice that carried genuine human terror. "They did something to us, but we're still people inside." Amy Foster raised her rifle, but hesitated as the creature continued to plead for rescue. The tactical situation demanded immediate action, but the apparent humanity of the target created moral complications that Velthari training had never addressed. "They're not people anymore," Jake announced, and fired 3 controlled bursts that dropped the woman thing. "And 2 other hybrid creatures? They're wearing human memories like clothing." Ben Cooper moved forward with his flamethrower and began systematic elimination of the remaining hybrids while they begged for mercy in human voices. His face showed no emotion as he burned creatures that remembered being children and parents and lovers. Kate Mills was taking notes in her tactical journal as if documenting routine pest control operations. "Core facility ahead," Lisa Shang reported after checking her demolition timer. 15 minutes until building comes down." The central chamber contained horrors that would require new words to properly describe, and Zethkar realized that humans were capable of things that his people had never imagined necessary. Rows of human prisoners were connected to devour biomachinery through tubes and wires that pulsed with shared fluids. Some captives were clearly dead, but their bodies continued to move and speak under alien control. Others were conscious and aware of their situation, but physically integrated with devour organisms in ways that made separation impossible. They begged for death in human voices, while their modified nervous systems forced them to attack anyone who approached. Amy Foster began systematic mercy killings while tears ran down her face, but her aim never wavered. "Recording devices located," Kate Mills announced. The Devourers documented everything they did here. Jake Morrison was studying the recordings with clinical detachment that frightened Deathcar more than any battle rage would have. Intelligence value, he asked while human screams echoed from the audio files. Significant, Kate replied. Complete biological conversion protocols and psychological manipulation techniques. This could help us identify hybrid infiltrators in other locations. Copy everything, then destroy the originals, Jake ordered. We take the data, but leave no trace for anyone else to find. Lisa Chang was placing final charges throughout the facility while Ben Cooper eliminated the last of the hybrid creatures with his flamethrower. The systematic destruction of everything in the building proceeded with mechanical efficiency that ignored the moral implications of burning beings that still retained human memories. Time to go, Lisa announced as her demolition timer reached final countdown. The building collapsed in 3 minutes. The squad moved toward the exit while Zethkar struggled to process what he had witnessed. These humans had walked into hell itself and emerged with useful intelligence rather than trauma or horror. They had killed creatures that looked human and begged for mercy without hesitation or regret. How can you function after seeing this? He asked Jake as they reached the extraction point. Because if we don't function, the bugs win, Jake replied. And if the bugs win, then everything we just saw happens to every human colony in the galaxy. The facility exploded behind them in a controlled demolition that erased all evidence of Devourer experimentation. Amy Foster was humming again as she cleaned her rifle while Ben Cooper made notes about flamethrower effectiveness against hybrid targets. Lisa Chang was already planning demolition strategies for the next suspected facility. Captain Hayes met them at the extraction point and reviewed their mission reports with professional interest. Useful intelligence, he commented after studying Kate Mill's documentation. We'll need to brief other units about hybrid identification techniques. No problem, sir, Jake replied. My team can provide training on verification and elimination procedures. Zethkar watched these humans plan the systematic application of torture and murder techniques as if they were discussing routine military logistics. They had sacrificed their own moral principles to protect their species, and they seemed completely comfortable with the exchange. Ready for the next mission, boss, Amy Foster said with her usual cheerful demeanor restored. Always, Jake replied, with what might have been affection for his squad. Let's go find some more bugs to kill. 2 weeks after the facility assault, Zethkar found himself in the strangest situation of his military career as he watched Jake Morrison write personal letters to the families of every colonist they had failed to save. The human squad leader sat at a small desk in the temporary command center with a stack of handwritten notes that grew larger each day. His penmanship was careful and deliberate as he explained to grieving relatives how their loved ones had died. Mrs. Patterson, Jake read aloud as he reviewed his latest letter. Your husband fought bravely until the end, and his sacrifice helped save 17 other colonists from devourer capture. He would want you to know that his final thoughts were of you and little Sarah. Amy Foster was across the room teaching a group of young Velthari refugees how to play something called hopscotch while singing human children's songs in their own language. Her voice carried the same warmth she had shown before systematically executing hybrid creatures with her rifle. The transformation between killer and caregiver happened so smoothly that Zethkar wondered if he was observing multiple personalities in the same body. Lisa Chang had volunteered for demolition work in the refugee camps where she used her expertise with explosives to clear safe pathways through unstable ruins. She worked with the same precision she had shown while placing charges to eliminate evidence of devourer experimentation, but now her skills served to protect innocent civilians rather than destroy compromised facilities. Structural analysis complete, she announced to a group of Velthari engineers. We can bring down these 3 buildings without affecting the surrounding shelters. Give everyone 30 minutes to clear the area. Ben Cooper spent his off-duty hours in the medical bay checking on wounded survivors from both human and Velthari populations. He had memorized the names and conditions of every patient and brought small gifts or comfort items when possible. The same hands that had operated Flamethrowers against hybrid creatures now changed bandages and offered encouragement to traumatized children. "How are you feeling today, Marcus?" he asked a young human boy who had lost his parents in the Devourer assault. "Want to see the new picture book I found in the supply drops?" Kate Mills was learning Velthari language and customs with genuine enthusiasm that seemed completely disconnected from her role as interrogation specialist and intelligence analyst. She spent hours each day with elderly Velthari historians recording their stories and traditions for preservation in human databases. "Your people have such rich cultural heritage," she told Zethkar during one of their language practice sessions. "I want to make sure none of it gets lost because of the war." Danny Price and Chris Webb had organized recreational activities for mixed species. Groups of survivors and their easy humor helped bridge cultural gaps that formal diplomacy might have taken years to address. They told jokes that translated well between species and taught games that required cooperation rather than competition. The most disturbing observation for Zethkar was how completely normal these humans seemed when they were not actively engaged in warfare. Their kindness appeared genuine rather than performed, and their concern for others crossed species boundaries without hesitation. They were the same people who had tortured suspected infiltrators and burned hybrid creatures alive, but now they seemed incapable of unnecessary cruelty. "I do not understand how you function," Zethkar finally said to Jake during a quiet moment between administrative duties. "Your actions in combat violated every principle of civilized behavior, yet you show genuine compassion for strangers." Jake finished signing another condolence letter before responding. "Combat is one thing," he said quietly. "Living is something else entirely. If we let the war change who we are when we're not fighting, then the bugs win, even if we kill every last one of them." "But how do you separate the two modes of existence?" Zethkar pressed. "Your people torture and kill without hesitation when the mission requires it, then return to gentleness as if nothing happened." "Practice," Jake replied with a smile that held no humor. "Lots and lots of practice at being human when it's safe to be human again." Amy Foster approached with a young Velthari child who had drawn pictures of human and Velthari soldiers working together. "Little Kekstar here wants to show you his artwork," she said with the same maternal warmth she used with all the refugee children. The drawing showed stick figures with 4 arms fighting alongside stick figures with 2 arms against creatures that were clearly meant to be devourers. Crude though it was, the picture captured something important about the alliance that formal military reports had missed. These species were learning to trust each other at the most basic level. "Very good work," Zethkar told the child in his own language. "You will be a fine artist someday." Later that evening, Captain Hayes called a briefing for all senior personnel, and Zethkar learned that the humans were already planning their next operation against Devourer forces. The mission would involve infiltrating a heavily defended research station where the enemy was reportedly developing new biological weapons. "Intel suggests they're working on airborne pathogens," Hayes explained while displaying tactical data. "If they succeed in creating atmospheric dispersal systems, we could be looking at planetary-scale extinction events." Lisa Chang was studying structural diagrams of the target facility with professional interest. "Demolition will be tricky," she observed. "Too much explosive force could rupture containment systems and release whatever they're brewing in there." "Precision work then," Jake replied. "Small teams with surgical strike capabilities." Amy Foster was already checking her rifle while Ben Cooper sharpened his combat knife with the same careful attention he had shown while helping wounded children. Kate Mills was reviewing psychological profiles of enemy researchers while Danny Price and Chris Webb discussed ammunition requirements for extended operations. The transformation from caregivers back to killers happened so smoothly that Zethkar barely noticed the transition until it was complete. These humans could switch between modes of existence with practiced ease that suggested years of experience managing the contradiction between their wartime and peacetime personalities. "Questions or concerns?" Hayes asked as the briefing concluded. "Just one, sir," Jake replied. "Rules of engagement for research personnel. Assume hostile until proven otherwise," Hayes answered. Anyone working on biological weapons forfeits protection under normal prisoner protocols. Understood, Jake nodded. No survivors, no samples, no evidence, Zethkar watched the humans plan another mission that would require them to abandon their moral principles in service of strategic objectives. They would return to being monsters temporarily, then force themselves back into humanity afterward. The psychological strength required for such transitions was beyond anything his people had ever developed. Ready for another hunting trip, warrior? Amy Foster asked with her characteristic cheerfulness restored. Yes, Zethkar replied, though he was no longer certain what that answer meant. I am ready, but as he prepared his equipment for the upcoming mission, Zethkar realized that he was beginning to understand something profound about human nature. These people did not fight with honor because honor was a luxury that got innocent. People killed. They fought to win, and they were willing to sacrifice their own moral comfort to ensure that evil did not triumph. It was the most terrifying and admirable thing he had ever witnessed. 6 months later, Zethkar stood in the briefing room of another joint operations vessel and realized that he was no longer the same warrior who had first met Jake Morrison's squad. His request for permanent assignment to human units had been approved by Velthari Command, though they clearly did not understand his reasons. The official record stated that he was providing valuable intelligence about human military capabilities, but the truth was more complicated. Jake Morrison entered the briefing room carrying the same tired expression that Zethkar had learned to associate with difficult missions. The human squad leader had aged noticeably during their time together, and new scars marked his face and hands. Amy Foster followed close behind, still humming her country songs, but the melodies had grown darker over the months. Morning, warrior, Jake said with genuine warmth. Ready for another day at the office, Lisa Shang was setting up holographic displays, showing a Devour stronghold that intelligence reported was using psychological warfare against 3 different species. The facility was located on a moon with minimal atmosphere where conventional assault tactics would be extremely difficult. Then Cooper was studying approach routes while Kate Mills reviewed enemy psychological profiles. This one is going to be ugly, Lisa observed as she highlighted defensive positions around the target. They've had months to prepare, and they know we're coming. Danny Price and Chris Webb were checking equipment loads for the extended operation while Captain Hayes reviewed mission parameters with his staff officers. The target facility had been broadcasting propaganda transmissions designed to break enemy morale, and several Allied units had suffered complete psychological collapse after exposure to Devourer mental manipulation techniques. Intelligence suggests they're using captured personnel as test subjects, Hayes announced to the assembled team leaders, refining their techniques on live subjects before deployment against larger populations. Amy Foster stopped humming while Ben Cooper's hand moved unconsciously to his combat knife. These humans had learned to recognize the signs of missions that would require them to abandon normal moral constraints, and their preparations had become ritualistic over time. Kate Mills was already reviewing interrogation protocols while Lisa Chang calculated explosive requirements for evidence destruction. Rules of engagement, Jake asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Scorched earth, Hayes replied. The psychological weapons they're developing could break entire species if they achieve wide deployment. Nothing leaves that facility intact. Understood, sir, Jake nodded. Standard cleanup protocols. Zethkar watched the humans prepare for another mission that would require them to become temporarily monstrous in service of strategic objectives. The process no longer horrified him because he had learned to see the strength required to repeatedly sacrifice one's own moral purity for the protection of others. These people damn themselves to save strangers and then force themselves back into humanity afterward. Transport launches in 2 hours, Hayes continued. This operation is classified at the highest levels because of the potential for psychological contamination. Mission records will be sealed and personnel debriefing will be mandatory. Lisa Chang was packing specialized demolition charges designed to create maximum structural damage, while minimizing atmospheric dispersal of potentially dangerous materials. Her efficiency had improved over months of similar operations, and she could now destroy evidence of devourer research with scientific precision. Amy Foster was loading ammunition that included specialized rounds designed to disable rather than kill when capture of subjects was required for intelligence purposes. Her marksmanship had evolved beyond simple target elimination to include tactical wounding and psychological pressure techniques that Zethkar found deeply disturbing. Ben Cooper's equipment now included medical supplies alongside his traditional combat gear because human operations frequently required immediate field treatment of subjects who possessed critical intelligence. His knowledge of anatomy had expanded to include interrogation applications that violated every principle of Velthari medical ethics. Kate Mills carried portable electronics designed to record and analyze enemy psychological manipulation techniques, while maintaining her own mental defenses against attack. Her training had progressed far beyond simple intelligence gathering to include active psychological warfare capabilities. Personal gear check complete, Jake announced after reviewing his squad's equipment loads. Everyone clear on mission objectives. Infiltrate. Document eliminate, Amy recited with mechanical precision. No survivors, no samples, no evidence. Psychological warfare protocols active, Kate added. Full mental defenses and counter-manipulation techniques authorized. Demolition packages armed and ready, Lisa confirmed. Facility destruction guaranteed within mission timeline. Medical and interrogation supplies prepared, Ben reported. Emergency. Treatment and information extraction capabilities ready. Danny Price and Chris Webb completed their own equipment reviews while Zethkar checked his plasma rifle and considered how much he had changed since first working with human units. His own tactical thinking now included considerations that would have seemed abhorrent to his younger self. He had learned to evaluate enemy positions not just for military effectiveness, but for psychological impact and evidence destruction requirements. Questions or concerns? Hayes asked as the briefing concluded. Timeline for a psychological weapon. Deployment if we fail, Jake inquired. Intelligence estimates 2 weeks maximum, Hayes replied. After that, we could be looking at species-wide mental collapse across multiple worlds. Then we don't fail, Jake said with the calm certainty that Zethkar had learned to associate with human determination. Simple as that. The transport ship carried them toward another mission that would require moral compromises and tactical brutality, but Zethkar no longer questioned the necessity of such operations. He had witnessed what happened when the Devourers were allowed to complete their research projects, and the alternative to human methods was not honorable defeat but total extinction. You've gotten quiet, warrior, Amy observed as they approached the target system. Something bothering you? I am reflecting on how much I have learned about warfare, Zethkar replied carefully. Your people have taught me that victory requires sacrifices beyond simple physical courage. Yeah, well, Jake said with a tired smile. Someone has to be willing to get their hands dirty when the galaxy is at stake. Might as well be us. Lisa Chung was making final adjustments to her demolition timers while Ben Cooper reviewed target facility layouts for optimal interrogation sites. Kate Mills was running psychological defense protocols through her personal electronics while Danny Price and Chris Webb discussed ammunition distribution for maximum tactical flexibility. 30 minutes to drop zone, the pilot announced over the comm system. Weather looks clear and enemy activity is minimal. Amy Foster started humming again, but the melody was something Zethkar had never heard before. When he asked about it, she explained that it was a song her grandmother used to sing about soldiers coming home from wars that nobody wanted to fight, but everybody needed to win. The chorus goes like this, she said. Some folks carry darkness so others can see light. Some folks do the hard things so others sleep at night. Jake Morrison checked his weapon one final time and looked at his mixed human and Velthari squad with obvious pride. Ready to save the galaxy again, people? He asked. Always, boss, Amy replied, with genuine enthusiasm. Let's go kill some bugs. As the dropship entered atmosphere, Zethkar realized that he no longer wanted to return to traditional Velthari military units. These humans had shown him a kind of heroism that required becoming temporarily evil in service of ultimate good. They fought without honor because honor was a luxury that got innocent People killed. In his final log entry before the mission began, Zethkar wrote words that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. I have fought beside humans and witnessed real horror. Not the horror of what they do to enemies, but the horror of what they are willing to sacrifice of themselves to protect others. They damn themselves so that strangers can live free. That is not monster behavior. That is the purest form of heroism I have ever witnessed. The last line recorded his formal request to undergo human military training protocols because he had learned that sometimes to fight monsters you need people willing to become monsters temporarily and, more importantly, people strong enough to come back from that darkness when the mission is complete.